He utterly hated James Dean. Now we know the reason why. Marlon Brando was born on April 3, 1924, in the seemingly unremarkable town of Omaha, Nebraska. Brando's beginnings hardly hinted at the seismic force he would become. His childhood was, by many accounts, troubled. His father was often distant, emotionally unavailable, and demanding. But the more profound influence, and source of deep pain, was his mother, Dorothy Pennebaker. Brando, a free-spirited woman who struggled with alcoholism. Young Marlon witnessed her struggles, her public embarrassments, and the resulting chaos within the family. This turbulent home life, marked by instability and a lack of consistent emotional support, is widely believed to have forged the complex, often guarded, and deeply rebellious personality that defined Brando throughout his life. He was sent to a military academy, not by choice, but as an attempt to instill discipline, an attempt that failed spectacularly when he was expelled. Restless, intelligent, and simmering with a simmering resentment towards authority and conventional life, Brando was a young man desperate for an escape, for a stage, for somewhere he could channel the tempest brewing inside him. The escape route for Marlon Brando led him east, to the bustling, electric energy of New York City. It was there, in the late 1940s, that he found not just an escape, but a calling. He enrolled in the new school and, crucially, studied under the legendary Stella Adler, one of the pioneers of method acting in America. Adler taught actors to delve into their own emotional truth, to live the part from the inside out, not just perform it. Brando, with his raw intensity and deep-seated emotions, was a natural. He exploded onto the Broadway scene in Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire, as Stanley Kowalski, a role he didn't just play, he inhabited. His performance was primal, shocking, and utterly captivating. It wasn't just acting, it was a force of nature. Hollywood came calling, and Brando brought Stanley's raw power to the screen, earning his first Oscar nomination and instantly shattering the mold of the leading man. His subsequent roles in films like The Wild One cemented his image as the brooding. Meanwhile, a few years younger and with his own set of childhood wounds, James Dean was also drawn to New York and the transformative power of acting. Born on February 8, 1931, in Indiana, Dean's life took a tragic turn when his mother died when he was only 9. Sent to live with his aunt and uncle on a farm, he felt the isolation and yearning common to many method hopefuls. He too found his way to the heart of the method, studying at the Actors Studio, where Brando had already become a near mythic figure. Dean began his career with small parts on television and the stage, absorbing every lesson, watching his idol, Brando, redefine acting. There was a palpable hunger in Dean, a desperate need to prove himself, to reach the heights his idol had scaled. Both men, shaped by difficult pasts, found solace and expression in the method, but their paths to stardom, and their personalities, would soon collide. Marlon Brando's ascent was rapid and undeniable. His performance as Terry Malloy in On the Waterfront in 1954 was a masterclass in internal conflict and quiet power. The iconic I Could Have Been a Contender scene wasn't just acting, it was a raw, vulnerable confession that earned him his first Academy Award for Best Actor. By the mid-1950s, Brando wasn't just a star, he was the star, the benchmark for a new era of naturalistic, emotionally complex acting. He was the brooding sex symbol, the intellectual rebel, the actor who seemingly didn't act at all. He had redefined the craft and captivated the world. But then, almost overnight, a new force emerged, James Dean. In 1955, Elia Kazan, the director who had guided Brando in Streetcar and On the Waterfront, cast Dean in the lead role of Cal Trask in East of Eden. The choice seemed deliberate, almost provocative. Dean's performance was lauded for its raw emotion and restless energy, qualities immediately reminiscent of Brando's early work. That same year, Rebel Without a Cause was released, cementing Dean's status as the voice and face of a generation's angst and alienation. His portrayal of Jim Stark became the definitive image of the troubled, misunderstood teenager. Before Giant could even premiere, Dean had achieved a level of cultural phenomenon usually reserved for established legends, and he did it with just 2 major film roles released. The media and the public were quick to draw comparisons. Dean was hailed as Brando's successor, the younger, more volatile version of the Method King. Magazines ran headlines pitting them against each other, They were the two most significant method actors of their time, embodying a similar spirit of rebellion and inner turmoil. While Brando had paved the way, Dean sprinted down it with lightning speed. This sudden, intense comparison wasn't just external. It filtered back to both men, particularly to Brando, who had grown accustomed to being in a class of his own. The stage was set for something far more complex than simple professional admiration. The young pretender had arrived, and the king was watching. Beyond the silver screen, both Marlon Brando and James Dean navigated personal lives that were as complex and unconventional as their acting styles. In an era where Hollywood carefully curated public images, both men harbored secrets. While they had public relationships with prominent actresses and socialites, Brando with women like Movita Castaneda and Anna Kashfi, Dean with figures like Pier Angeli and Ursula Andress. Whispers circulated widely about their private lives. Both men were known to move in overlapping social circles, frequenting the same parties, restaurants, and artistic hangouts in New York and Los Angeles. They shared mutual friends, directors like Kazan, and potentially even lovers. Hollywood in the 1950s, despite its glamorous facade, was a place of intense personal pressure and hidden desires. Matters of sexuality, in particular, were strictly policed by studios and public opinion. For actors known for their raw, vulnerable on-screen personas, the lines between public image and private reality were constantly blurred, and often guarded fiercely. It's in these overlapping, secretive realms of personal relationships and hidden lives that the theories regarding the true depth of Brando's alleged animosity towards Dean take root. Because while professional competition was clear, the most brutal conflicts often arise from something far more personal, something tangled in the heart and the bedsheets. And it was here, behind closed doors and whispered conversations, that the reasons for Brando's utter hate are said to truly lie. So, why did Marlon Brando supposedly harbor such profound, utter hatred for James Dean? Perhaps the most superficial, yet constantly cited reason for Brando's disdain was Dean's almost blatant, often awkward, imitation of him. Dean didn't just admire Brando, he emulated him. From the mumbling, introspective delivery to the slouching posture, the leather jacket persona, and the simmering, internalized anger, Dean seemed to be doing a conscious impression of his idol. Actors borrowing from each other is common, but Dean's was reportedly so overt that it grated on Brando. According to numerous accounts from contemporaries and biographers, Brando found Dean's mimicry not flattering, but irritating, pathetic, and even disrespectful. Brando, the original, saw Dean as merely a pale, uninspired imitation. He had poured his difficult life experiences and complex psyche into developing his unique, raw style. To see Dean simply adopting the external tics and mannerisms, without perhaps the same deep emotional wellspring, felt like a cheap appropriation. Author Peter Manso, in his extensive biography of Brando, quotes actress Shelley Winters, who knew both men well and dated Brando on the subject. Winters reportedly said Brando felt Dean was just doing me. She recounts Brando making fun of Dean's attempts to copy him, finding it amateurish and annoying. Director Elia Kazan also noted the similarities, describing Dean's work in East of Eden as drawing heavily from what Brando had shown him in Streetcar. Brando, known for his sharp wit and often cruel sense of humor, would allegedly mock Dean behind his back. Stories circulated about Brando doing exaggerated impressions of Dean's mumble or his angst-ridden stares. This wasn't playful banter. It was dismissive contempt. Brando saw Dean not as a peer, but as a lesser being, a mere echo. And nothing is perhaps more irritating to a groundbreaking artist than seeing their revolutionary work reduced to a series of copied mannerisms by someone they perceive as intellectually or emotionally inferior. This constant mirroring, this unwelcome reflection, was a persistent, low-level irritant that set the stage for deeper animosity. Beyond the imitation, the fundamental personality differences between the two men likely fueled Brando's irritation. Brando could be charming, intelligent, and deeply sensitive, but he also possessed a cruel streak, a detachment, and a propensity for manipulating those around him. He valued authenticity, his own version of it, at least, and often seemed to disdain those he perceived as needy, fragile, or overly eager for approval. James Dean, while projecting an image of cool rebellion, was by many accounts a deeply insecure, emotionally vulnerable young man. He craved connection, validation, and perhaps most intensely, the approval of his idols, particularly Brando. Stories suggest Dean would sometimes try to engage Brando, seeking conversation or acceptance, only to be met with Brando's characteristic distance, sardonic humor, or outright dismissal. Actress and method teacher Lee Grant, who knew both, described Brando as having a wicked intelligence and a tendency to put people on sound, sometimes cruelly. Dean, with his raw nerves exposed, would have been an easy target for Brando's darker impulses. Imagine the dynamic: the established, often detached genius observing the younger, desperate, almost pathetic in his admiration newcomer. For someone with Brando's capacity for cruelty, Dean's open vulnerability might not have inspired mentorship, but rather contempt and a desire to exert power. There are anecdotes, difficult to verify definitively but widely circulated in Hollywood circles, of specific interactions where Brando allegedly belittled Dean. One story suggests a particularly cutting remark from Brando about Dean's acting choices on a set or in a class. Another hints at Brando deliberately ignoring Dean at a social gathering or making a pointed, humiliating comment within earshot of others. While seemingly minor incidents, for sensitive Dean seeking validation, and for Brando observing someone he found annoying, these clashes would have solidified negative feelings. Brando didn't just dislike Dean's acting style. He may have fundamentally disliked Dean the person, finding his neediness irritating and his attempts at connection tiresome. Now we arrive at the core, the most speculated upon, and arguably the most explosive reason behind Brando's alleged intense hatred for James Dean. This goes beyond professional jealousy or personality clashes. This theory posits a rivalry fought on a hidden battleground, their complex, often ambiguous, and overlapping personal lives, particularly concerning sexuality. Both Marlon Brando and James Dean were widely rumored to have had relationships with both men and women throughout their lives. In the restrictive climate of the 1950s, such relationships, especially for male stars, had to be kept absolutely secret. Studios employed morality clauses and private investigators to protect the carefully constructed heterosexual images of their leading men. For Brando and Dean, their bisexuality was an open secret among a select few in the industry, a source of constant anxiety, and something that added an immense layer of complexity to their interactions. This shared secret, ironically, didn't necessarily create a bond. Instead, according to persistent rumors and later accounts from those who lived through the era, it created another, more dangerous arena for competition. Hollywood at that time had a hidden social scene, where discreet relationships formed and dissolved away from public scrutiny, and it is here that the most compelling, and most dramatic, theories about the Brando-Dean animosity emerge. The whispers suggest that the conflict wasn't just over film roles or public image, but over people. Specifically, there is significant, albeit still largely unconfirmed, speculation that Marlon Brando and James Dean may have been romantically or sexually involved with some of the same individuals. Think about the potential for intense rivalry in such a scenario, especially given the personalities involved. Brando, established, charismatic, but also capable of deep possessiveness and cruelty. Dean, younger, insecure, perhaps looking for love or validation in the arms of people who might also be involved with his idol. Several names have been floated in connection with this overlapping web of relationships. One prominent figure often mentioned is Elia Kazan, the legendary director who worked closely with both men and was deeply involved in the actor's studio world they inhabited. While much of Kazan's personal life remains private, his close artistic and personal connections to both Brando and Dean, and his own complex history, have fueled speculation about the nature of those relationships and whether they could have been a source of tension between his two most famous protégés. Beyond Kazan, rumors have attached other names, both male and female, to the intertwined personal lives of Brando and Dean. While it's impossible to definitively confirm specifics without direct and unimpeachable testimony, the mere possibility of them competing for the affection or attention of the same person or people in their private, hidden lives adds an explosive new dimension to the idea of Brando's hate. Imagine Brando, accustomed to getting who and what he wanted, discovering Dean was involved with someone Brando was interested in, or already involved with. For a man with Brando's ego and capacity for jealousy, this would not just be annoying, it could be perceived as a profound betrayal or challenge. It turns professional competition into a deeply personal invasion of his private world. Conversely, Dean, who idolized Brando, might have sought connection with people Brando was close to, perhaps even pursuing relationships that Brando saw as a violation of his territory. If Brando was protective of his private circle, his friends, or his lovers, male or female, Dean's presence in those spaces, especially if Dean succeeded in forming connections Brando desired or felt were his, they could easily ignite a fuse of resentment and possessiveness. Furthermore, consider the psychological layer. If Brando was wrestling with his own identity and public image regarding his sexuality, seeing Dean navigating a similar path, perhaps more openly or differently than Brando preferred, could have been a source of projection and discomfort. Brando might have disliked aspects of himself that he saw mirrored or distorted in Dean's behavior or relationships. The hate could have been, in part, a form of self-loathing projected onto a convenient target. The sheer volume and persistence of these types of rumors within accounts of old Hollywood insider gossip lend them a certain weight, not necessarily as confirmed facts, but as plausible scenarios that were seriously discussed by contemporaries. It wasn't just one isolated whisper. It was a pattern of suggestion that Dean and Brando's lives intersected in ways that went beyond premieres and sound stages, touching upon their most vulnerable, most secretive selves. If these rumors are true, even partially, they provide a powerful, visceral explanation for Brando's alleged utter hatred. It wasn't just the copycat act. It wasn't just the annoying personality. It was the perceived intrusion into his most private domain. The competition for hearts and bodies in the hidden corners of Hollywood. A battle fought in silence, with only whispers and glares as weapons. This hidden rivalry, rooted in their shared secrets and overlapping personal lives, could have generated an animosity far more profound and bitter than any professional slight. It was a rivalry of the soul, fought it in the shadows, that could logically escalate to a feeling as intense as utter hatred. So, when people spoke of Brando hating Dean, they weren't just talking about two famous actors who didn't get along. They were hinting at this deeper, more personal, more dangerous layer of conflict. A conflict fueled by mimicry, personality clashes, and most significantly, a hidden competition for affection and validation in a world where truth had to be buried for the sake of fame. The intense, unresolved tension between Marlon Brando and James Dean was abruptly, tragically, and permanently frozen on September 30th, 1955. James Dean, driving his beloved Porsche 550 Spider, was involved in a devastating head-on collision near Cholami, California. He died instantly at the age of just 24. The news sent shockwaves around the world. Dean's death, at the height of his sudden, spectacular fame, cemented his status as an eternal icon of youth, rebellion, and tragic promise. His final film, Giant, was released posthumously, earning him a second Oscar nomination and solidifying his legend. For Brando, Dean's death meant the sudden removal of the younger man who had been both an irritant and a strange reflection. Any potential for their rivalry to evolve, to perhaps one day reach some form of understanding, unlikely as it seemed, was gone forever. While Brando's immediate reaction to Dean's death wasn't widely publicized in detail, accounts from those who knew him suggest a typical Brando mix of complex, perhaps even contradictory, emotions. Some sources claim Brando was indifferent, or even felt a sense of relief that the irritating copy was gone. Others hint at a more complex, perhaps even unsettling, reaction, the kind of response only a man as complicated and often detached as Brando could have. There was no public outpouring of grief, no heartfelt eulogy, just silence, and the continuation of his own long, complicated life. Brando would go on to have legendary career comebacks, but his personal life grew increasingly tumultuous, marked by failed marriages, family tragedies, and a growing reclusiveness fueled by his disdain for the Hollywood system and his own internal struggles. He battled with his weight, his health, and his demons privately, becoming a caricature of his former self to some, while still holding the reverence of many as the greatest actor of his generation. Marlon Brando died on July 1st, 2004, at the age of 80. Having lived decades longer than the man who had supposedly earned his utter hatred. He took many secrets with him. Marlon Brando and James Dean remain colossal figures in cinema, forever linked by their revolutionary approach to acting and their embodiment of the post-war spirit of rebellion. Brando, the pioneer who reshaped the craft. Dean, the ephemeral icon who captured the fleeting spirit of youth. Yet, their story is not just one of shared artistic heritage. It is, according to the persistent whispers and accounts, a story of alleged bitter animosity. The reasons for Brando's utter hatred were, as we've explored, a complex tapestry woven from professional annoyance at blatant imitation, personal irritation stemming from clashing personalities, and perhaps most profoundly, a hidden, intense rivalry rooted in their shared secrets and overlapping private lives, a battle fought for hearts and desires in the hidden corners of Hollywood. It shows that behind the carefully constructed images and the dazzling lights existed real people with deep insecurities, complex desires, and the capacity for profound animosity. Their story is a window into a time when authenticity was demanded on screen but often had to be buried in real life, creating a pressure cooker environment where competition could curdle into contempt, and hidden lives could spark public feuds. James Dean remains forever young, a symbol of eternal rebellion. Marlon Brando is the flawed, complex genius, the legend whose personal demons were as famous as his performances, and the alleged animosity between them, fueled by a mix of professional rivalry and deeply personal, hidden conflicts, remains one of Hollywood's most fascinating and darkest secrets.